welcome to the last session of this year, pre-summer. As I mentioned in the email, God willing, we will resume the week after Pesach, the week after Sukkot, October 17. We'll have a class hopefully before Rosh Hashanah, but it won't be an Ezra class. It'll be on something else because you can really only fit in one class, maybe two, before the long break for Yom Tov. So rather than have one session plopped into September and then start again in mid-October, we'll have a session that isn't an Ezra session at that point. The truth of the matter is, as I was mentioning before, I feel bad that we're stopping here. We're not going to finish Ezra today. If we had one more week, we could actually finish the book. But I feel like we've already lost some people to vacations, and with more people going away this coming week, it's not fair to people who have been going all year long to say, well, we're going to go an extra week just to finish the book. It's okay. God willing, we'll all be back here in the fall to be able to go forward. And if people want, they could always read the end of the book. I'm not like... Yeah, it's a cliffhanger. That's exactly right. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. That's what it is. It's designed as a cliffhanger, as a matter of fact. It's intentional. This is exactly what we were going for. All year long, we timed it for that. Okay, that's the new narrative. So we are up to Perek Yud, chapter 10. Very talkative. Okay. I will also note that there are flyers in the back or front, depending on which side of the room you're on, for Nishmat summer program. They do it every year, and it's always considered a great opportunity to come learn. It is for women alone. Sorry, males. But the flyers are there, and please take a look. It is held at Yeshivat Or Chaim in the last week in July. And I will also note that there are flyers here for Toronto Jewish Theater for a fall program, right?
Well, one is in July.
Oh, one is in July.
The Jewish Radio Hour, it's a musical, and the second one is in...
And the second one. Okay, so you have both options. Okay, so let's get to it here, because there's an awful lot that we need to talk about. Last week, we completed Perek Tet. We completed chapter 9, in which Ezra responded to the news that there are Jews who have married the nations around them. Again, we talked about whether this was in Bavel or whether it's back in Israel. It really seems like it's back in Israel. There's even the possibility, based on the names that we'll see towards the end of chapter 10, there's even the possibility that some of these people are people who came in Ezra's own wave of Aliyah just 4 months earlier. And they've gotten involved in these marriages. Ezra is horrified. He says this is terrible. And we talked about whether Ezra's reaction is because there's a biblical prohibition against these marriages, or whether Ezra is actually innovating a rabbinic prohibition out of concern for idolatry and people being led after the gods of the nations around them. Ezra fasts. He tears his clothing. He sits on the ground. Manifestations all of avelut, of mourning, except for the fasting, which sometimes is associated with grief, but doesn't have to be particularly. And Ezra cries out to God, but really he's crying out to God and to the people around him, because he. Is it explicitly that he was fasting? Yes. He did not eat. He did not drink. Right? If someone wants to call out the verse before I find it, that's fine too. But yes, the verse that verse 6. Thank you. No, that's going to be in chapter 10. That's going to be in chapter 10. But I think even back in chapter 9, there was a reference to him being betanit, to him being in a fast. But certainly in 10 it becomes very clear. Pasuk, Perek Parak Tes Pasuk Hey, right? Ta'aniti. That's good. Okay, so yeah, you have the reference. So in any case, the speech that Ezra gives is quasi prayer, but quasi addressed to the nation, as he describes how we sinned terribly, we were made to suffer, we've been slaves, first Babylonians and then of the Persians, and God has finally given us a little bit of a break, and here we are squandering it, sinking back into the same sins that landed us into trouble in the first place. He says, what can I say? We all know this is wrong. We are unworthy. And then he concluded by saying we are able to correct this. He said we can correct this, and he spoke out against intermarriage. And there we saw in chapter 9, sentence 12, we saw something we're going to have to come back to today, so I call your attention to it. When we read the verses in Malachi, in chapter 2 of Malachi, that are parallel to this story, we noted that Malachi speaks specifically about Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women. The reverse is not found there. He doesn't speak about Jewish women marrying non-Jewish males. And we noted that when the story is first reported in the beginning of chapter 9, it's about Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women. We did not see the reverse, and we brought a couple of commentators, I think of Barbanel among them, who said that this is because there were no Jewish women marrying non-Jewish men. That far we did not sink. Only the other way around, the Jewish men marrying the non-Jewish women. Why it's true that would be so much worse is actually a very important question, which we're going to have to come back to today. That was the statement that was made then. If you take a look at chapter 9, sentence 12, we find Ezra speak out against both practices. He says, do not give your daughters to their sons, and do not take from their daughters for your sons. So Ezra speaks out against both practices. Does that mean that both were going on? Does that mean only one was going on, but Ezra speaking out against both? Unclear to me, but we have to keep this in mind as we go through this today. So that brings us to Perek Yud, chapter 10. If you're using the Stone Tanakh, you're on page 1835. Uchehispalel Ezra uchehisvadoso. When Ezra prayed, and when Ezra acknowledged the sin, admitted the sin, boche umisnapel lifnei beis ha'elokim, crying and falling before the house of God, the temple, Beis HaMikdash, nikbitzu elav miYisrael kahal rav ma'od. A large group gathered to him. Anashim, men, vinashim, and women, viladim, and children. Kivachu ha'am harbe vecha, because the nation cried a lot. We're going to read through the first 4 sentences and then come back to discuss all of them. Vayan Shechaniah ben Yechiel. There's a fellow by the name of Shechaniah ben Yechiel. We have never met him before. Who answered him, or who declared really, Mibnei Elam. He is from Elam. That does not mean he is a non-Jewish Elamite. It could just as easily mean from the region of, his ancestors are from the region of. Vayomer le'Ezra, and he says to Ezra, Anachnu ba'alnu be'Elokeinu. We have trespassed against our God. Note, this trespass against our God, he used the same term that Ezra used. Right? This term of desecrating that which is sacred, mi'ilah, was a term that Ezra had used as well multiple times. Vanoshev nashim nachuyos me'amei ha'aretz. We have taken foreign wives from the nations of the land. Notice again, emphasis on taking wives from the nations, not the other way around. Ve'ata yesh mikveh Yisrael al zos. And now he says there is hope for Israel for this. Mikveh, not meaning mikvah. Mikvah like tikvah, ha-tikvah, that sort of word. Right? It means there is hope. Is he saying it as a statement? Is he asking it as a question? It seems like it's a statement, because he's about to suggest something. This is what he thinks the hope is. Ve'ata, and now, nichros bris le'Elokeinu, we will make a covenant for our God, la'otzi chol nashim, to end these marriages, to divorce all of the women, v'hanolad mehem, as well as those born from them, ba'atzas Hashem, at the counsel of God, v'hacharedim b'mitzvas Elokeinu, and those who are those who tremble at the command of our God. V'chatorah ye'aseh, and like the teaching, as is ruled, so shall be done. And he says, the last sentence, kum, he says to Ezra, get up. Ki alecha hadavar, it's on you. Va'anachnu imach, and we are with you. Chazak va'aseh, be strong and do it. That's his statement to Ezra. There's an awful lot to be said here. There's a lot going on. What questions come up as we read this? Sorry? Hope?
Why him?
Well, what's that? What do you mean by hope?
But it seems to be that Ezra's talking about a disastrous situation, and now he says there's hope.
Well, Shechaniah says there's hope. Ezra didn't say there was hope. That's Shechaniah talking. Yes. Ari and then Sharon.
Who is this guy, Shechaniah?
Yeah. Who are you, Shechaniah ben Yechiel? Like, where have you been all of Ezra's life? What is this man? From Elam. Elam is just, a region under the control of the Persian Empire. But who is Shechaniah ben Yechiel? Sharon.
No, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
That who is he?
Yeah. Out of nowhere, huh? Go ahead.
And
Sharon.
how come it's only one-sided? Like, we'll just take out the women. There's nothing about the men. Like,
There's nothing about the non-Jewish males. Right. Does it mean there weren't any, or does it mean something else? Shayna.
I know how you divorce a spouse, but how do you divorce a child?
Mm-hmm.
Check him out.
Well, the implication is, do what happened to Hagar. Right? She's out and the kid with her.
Yeah, but we look on that as an abhorrent thing that happened. Well, at least some of us do look. That's not what he did to make Sarah, his infertile wife, happy. Abhorrent.
Why?
Why? Because he sent her out into the desert to die.
Who said he sent her to die? Who said he sent her to die?
What did he send her out with? A tent and with food and with camels and with servants?
Bread and water.
I didn't notice that.
Bread and water and a 17-year-old son. He's 17 years old. I have a 17-year-old son. He can manage it for himself.
Well, my grandchildren. I don't know. I think we look upon that as not a very...
It's true that it's without a doubt it's true. That's a difficult story. I don't mean to be take it as lightly as I'm saying it. But this business of sending away the children, you do have to. We don't know what their age is. We don't know if these are babies. There can't be any babies from the second wave. That's clear, because we're within 4 months of when the second wave arrived, and I don't care what crazy things happen in Tanakh, you don't have babies from the second wave. Maybe from the first wave. If they're from the first wave, they could be decades old. We have no idea who we're talking about. And certainly if they're from back in Bavel. But we're not given enough information. So we need to know, not only that, you're getting rid of the kids, but did you notice that there were kids who came to the party, so to speak? Mm-hmm. There were kids who came to the party, right? Party, I'm joking. But the verse says, Ezra is crying in front of the temple, and men, women, and children joined in. We don't usually mention children joining in for things like this, even if they're there, right? Outside of the story of, or not the story of, the mitzvah of Hakhel. Right? What's the mitzvah of Hakhel? Every 7 years we are supposed to gather the people together. It's on Sukkot, the year after Shemitah. And we have a public reading of parts of the Torah. And we're told specifically, gather everybody, men, women, and children. Anashim, Anashim, V'hataf. Everybody is supposed to be there. And it's a ceremony of recommitment to the Torah. That's what that is. So that here, I wonder if there isn't that element of it going on, that kind of a vision, but we'll see more that might give us another slant on the kids. But they're singled out here. There's a reason for that. Here's a question for you. Yeah?
Now, I would say, my question is that there doesn't seem to be any consideration in terms of perhaps some form of conversion, some form of making them among the people.
Right. Why is there no discussion of conversion? It's not even on the table. It's not like the women refused. They weren't offered, from anything I can see here. So that's another one. Not to mention, if you say that the prohibition against intermarriage is biblical, right? Which, keep in mind, very prominent position, right? Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, we like them, generally speaking. So if so, why do you need a covenant? Why do you need to say in verse 3, we're going to declare a covenant to the God of Israel, and we're going to get rid of... What do you mean? Like, it's on the books already. What's your point? What have you... It had been broken? I mean, is that true in general? So now if people stop eating kosher, we have to make a new covenant about keeping kosher?
It's a good question. Maybe.
Maybe. I need a basis for that one. And the big question for me, why does Ezra need to be charged with, get up, this is on you? Has he not read this book? Does he not know the letter that Artaxerxes sent with him, empowering him to lead everybody, teach people Torah, enforce the rules of the Torah? Does he not know that he has every weapon necessary at his disposal? Why do you need to be told, get up, Ezra? What happened to you?
How do we know that it's Ezra who's addressed here?
Because he said it to him, no? That's what it says. He's speaking to Ezra. Vayomer LaEzra in sentence 2. Who else would he be speaking to?
Didn't you say he was mourning? He was sitting down and...
Right, so physically he says get up, like get up physically. Yeah.
Stop this morning, stop all this, do something.
Because you've portrayed, haven't you, in the last few weeks, Ezra not as a man of action so much as a spiritual leader.
Right, and I think that's very much a part of what's going on. I'm going to have another layer to add when we talk about it now, but I think that's very much driving what's going on. Yeah, Julie.
That's beside this idea of so he confesses and weeps and cries until somebody tells him to get up. Like, it can almost seem to be manipulative, right? Because that's what someone who is manipulative will do. Like, they will scream and like, how could you do this? Like take for example the Yiddish mama stereotype. If you don't do this, I'll kill myself. Like, I'm not saying Ezra is manipulative or abusive, but like you can read it that way.
I think it's a far cry from the Yiddish mama saying, if you don't do this, I'll starve, or I won't eat, or whatever it is, and abusive. But I think that I think manipulative is one way to characterize leadership. In other words, somebody who is going to act in order to get people to do something is manipulative. But very often we praise that kind of behavior. I'm not sure when we use the word manipulative and it's a bad thing, and when we use the word manipulative and it's a good thing. I think absolutely part of what Ezra has done has been a dramatic presentation meant to move people. But I don't see anything sinister in that. I don't see anything criminal in that. I think that's his job. I do think, though, to go back to what Joseph said, that he is not just a spiritual leader, but I think that he's somebody who doesn't see himself as pushing people. He doesn't think that's a good way to lead. In his mind, inspiring others is better than being the one who's going to get up and say, now this is what we are doing. I think there's a difference. So let's go back through this now and see where it takes us. First of all, the theme is that Ezra does not coerce. I think that's very clear. The nation chooses to gather around him. Right? He did not hold a public gathering. He's crying, and everybody hears him and starts crying. If you take a look at source number 1, as an example of this, Mitzudat David picks up on the language in the text, which said that they actually the text said they came because of the crying. He says, "Ba'avur tfilas Ezra," because of Ezra's prayer, "Bachu ha'am asher nimtzeu imo," the nation with him cried, "Ulakol b'chiyosam," and because of the sound of their cries, nikbetzu kahal rav, a great community gathered. So that it was a process where Ezra generated this not by summoning people, but rather by people responding to what he was doing. And then with this call of get up, Mitzudat David in source number 2 makes the point, we're going to come back to this in a little bit, but he says, Kum heyeh zariz badavar, be energetic in the matter, kihi muteles alecha, because it's on you. Ki ata rosh lekulanu, you are our leader, v'anachnu niyeh imcha be'ezrascha, and we will be with you to help you. But make no mistake about it, Ezra, this is your role. Whether Shechaniah is doing this because Ezra moved him to do it or on his own is really moot. But it is Ezra's role. As Malbim notes, Ezra is supposed to be the enforcer of Jewish law. Shechaniah is 100% correct. This is Ezra's job. So let's go through the verses and see where they take us. They're going to take us far, that's for sure. So, first of all, who are these Yeladim? Who are the kids? So, one argument you could make is the argument I just gave before, that this is a Hakhel image. The image of the nation gathering together to hear the Torah collectively, to be inspired, to come to God. That's what the image is here, with them crying. However, there's another possibility for who these kids are, and I think Malbim is implying this. He doesn't quite say it explicitly, but I'm pretty sure this is where he's going. Take a look at source number 3. Malbim picks up on the women being present. And he says, Yesh Lomar, you could say, Shenikbetzu gamkein nashim sheba'aleim lakchu nashim nachruyos. Ve'im bachu gamkein. He says, remember that in Malachi, the women are crying at the Mizbeach because their husbands have taken foreign wives. So this is now what we're describing here. Those women are the ones who are crying and saying, how could this have happened? And then, if that's true, what Malbim is saying, then maybe Yeladim are the children of these husbands who have now gone off with their foreign wives. In other words, these are the children they had from their Jewish wives. Yeah.
You're talking about more than one wife.
Yes. Yes. I mean, polygamy being the norm at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
So, is it not true that in Africa, when there were several wives or whatever, if things weren't right, they were pushed out or exiled to some hut somewhere else?
I do not know. I don't know. Is that from the book?
No.
Oh. Another book. Okay. No, I'm unfamiliar with it. Don't know. So there's a lot of crying. Works of fiction have no place here. That's another story. So again, the introduction we have is that the nation is crying. The men are crying, the women are crying. Perhaps those are the Jewish wives of the men who have taken foreign wives. Perhaps these are the children from the Jewish women. And then we're told that there's a fellow named Shechaniah ben Yechiel who gets up to speak and offers that there is hope. So who in the world is he? So we actually did note this name earlier on, sort of. If you jump very quickly back to chapter 8, sentence 5, when we have a list of people who came with Ezra. So there we have Ibnei Shechaniah ben Yachaziel. You see that name?
Also in verse 3.
Right, but in 3 you don't have the Yachaziel. You just have the name Shechaniah show up. In verse 5 you actually have something that sounds an awful lot like the name Shechaniah ben Yechiel. So there are those who suggest that actually it's the same person, which would be important because it means that he's from the second wave. Right? It means that this is somebody who came with Ezra. He's not somebody who's been there a long time. He's also a newcomer.
He has the most males with him as well.
He has the most males?
He has 300. Nobody else has as many as 300. So maybe that could indicate some kind of leadership position.
Interesting. Okay. He has many...
He has the biggest army.
Okay. That's a very interesting point. I had not noticed that.
So maybe that's why he's positive to be the spokesperson.
Okay. Interesting. Could be. Certainly when you, unless your 300 males have all married out, in which case you're really not in a position to take a stand on this. But it could be. That would give him a certain degree of say. But Rabbi Yaakov Meidan makes a really interesting point here in source number 4, with a parallel to an event in Chumash. And the truth is, I didn't actually note for you the event in Chumash on the sheet, and I really should have, come to think of it. It's important to read it as we get into this story. So take a look. Go back to the very end of Parshas Balak. It's page 389. No, page 393.
Where is that in English, please? I don't have...
Balak is in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers.
Okay.
Balak is translated as Balak. That's the best I can do for you.
Numbers, and what's the citation?
You want Numbers chapter 25. This is the story in which the Jews get involved with the daughters of Moab. So, starting from Pasuk Vav, okay, sentence 6. V'hinei ish mibnei Yisrael ba. A man from the Jews came along, and he brought to his brethren a Midianite woman, Le'enei Moshe, before the eyes of Moshe, Ule'enei kaladas b'nei Yisrael, and before the eyes of all Israel. Ve'ema bochim Pesach Ohel Moed, and they were all crying at the entrance to the tent. Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen, Vayakam mitoch ha'edah. Pinchas sees this, he gets up out of the group, Vayikach romach biyado, he takes a spear, and he kills them. That's your story. We mentioned this story already 2 weeks ago when we started on this conversation. I think it was 2 weeks ago. And we said that this would seem to indicate there is some kind of a biblical standing prohibition against intermarriage, because otherwise what did Pinchas think he was doing? But leaving that aside, because that we already dealt with, you notice what Moshe is doing in this story? Apparently, no. Moshe. Moshe is apparently off to the side in the group that's crying. Right? Unclear who Hema is in the sentence. Whether they were crying, is that the Jews or is the Jews plus Moshe? What's very clear is that Moshe is not the one who's acting while this goes on. And here you have Shechaniah ben Yechiel sees what's going on, does not take up the sword, but instead, he says, we are going to separate the men and the women who have done this, as Ezra is sitting there on the ground crying. You see the parallel. So that's what Rav Meidan picks up on in source number 4 in an article called Mechalek HaMishpachot, the separator of families. He says, credit really goes to Shechaniah as the new Pinchas. Shechaniah ben Yechiel hu ish almoni. Shechaniah ben Yechiel is just some man, right? Ish almoni from like Ploni Almoni, right? It doesn't mean almoni that he's a widower. We don't know if he's a widower or not. He's just some anonymous man, Shemishader Lanu, who informs us, Yesh Mimi Lilmod, there is someone we can learn from. Kulam Bochim Yachadim in Hamanhig, they're all crying together with the leader. Bechi Shel Tiskul V'Shel Yeush, it's a crying of frustration, it's a crying of hopelessness, Mul Bayash Nir'id Gedolah Mikol Pitaron Efshari, against a problem that seems to be greater than any possible solution. They raise their eyes to the heavens, presumably, in prayer, hoping that a solution is going to come down in a heavy cloud from the heavens onto the mountain, right? The image going back to Moshe in the Midbar, God comes down in a cloud and He presents you with a solution to your problems. Domeh, it appears, Shanes shehitrachesh b'foal gadol lo pachot me'anan hayared mishamayim. He says, and you know what? The miracle that happened was no smaller than the miracle of a cloud coming down out of the heavens. The idea that one of the Jews would get up with this suggestion and proclaim it fearlessly to the nation, that's not a small thing. Lefeta, suddenly, Kam Almoni Mibnei Aliyah Rishona. He thinks that he's from the first wave. I don't know why he says that, except because the name Shechaniah ben Yachaziel is not the same as Shechaniah ben Yechiel in the second wave, so he assumes he must be from the first, I guess. But he says, suddenly, someone from the first wave of arrivals gets up and declares, Yesh Tikva. There is hope. Yesh Pitaron. There's a solution. Ezra Yovil. Ezra will lead. V'chulanu acharav, and all of us will follow him. Shechaniah ben Yechiel matzia seder yom. Shechaniah offers an order of action, shepsichaso kamuvan bechvisas bris chadasha ben kol am Yisrael levein Elokav, which begins with the execution of a new covenant between the Jewish people and their God. And the ellipsis there is his for dramatic effect. Lovesh bigdei avodah. He wears blue-collar garb. It means he's a regular Joe. He's not a Kohen Gadol. He's not anointed as a leader. We've never heard from him before. We're not going to hear from him again. And that's exactly the point. Is that somebody from the rank and file steps up to say, this is what needs to be done. And at that point, he makes the Pinchas association. It's hard not to be reminded of his twin from the sin of Baal Peor. Gam sham haisa ba'aya doma. There was a similar problem. Haznus and benos hanechar, this straying after the foreign women, benos Moab and benos Midian. In that case, Moab and Midian were the nations. Gam sham haya pitaron. There, the solution also was kolel shel hamanhig, including the solution of the leader was bachi, was to cry. Aval haya chad shekam, and there was one who arose, and that was in fact Pinchas. So he makes that association. It's not quite parallel, right? It's not quite parallel because Pinchas was an aristocrat, right? Pinchas, whether he was a Kohen yet or not, was grandson of Aharon, great nephew of Moshe. Right? Pinchas has all the lineage you want, and even if, as Debbie suggests, maybe he had the largest family among the new Olim, at the end of the day, that doesn't match what Pinchas had. So in that sense, it's not parallel. But I think his point about it connecting the two stories is instructive, particularly because we've spent a lot of time, we did back in the beginning of chapter 7, on the Ezra-Moshe parallels. So this is another example of the Ezra-Moshe parallels. Now, to a modern ear, you must state at this stage that to a modern ear, the solution to the problem is not a great solution. Certainly Pinchas' solution of execution, or the solution of let's break up the families and send away the wives with their kids, is not one that the modern ear is going to like very much. So given and stipulated, entered into the record. Nonetheless, this is you might like his solution more than you like Pinchas' solution. But this is ultimately what he feels is necessary in order to save the nation. That's his argument. Yeah.
I don't know if I should ask this question because I don't know enough to ask. But when did conversion become acceptable in the Torah?
Great question.
With Ruth?
Yeah.
When did it?
Right.
Because this is not good.
Great question. Hold the thought. We have to come to that question, so we're getting there. It's a very good question to ask. If you want, you can jump down to number 6 and start to see some of the material on it, but otherwise we'll get there. Julie and then Debbie.
So I was taught that Elijah the prophet is either a reincarnation of Pinchas or actually is Pinchas because his dad is super old. Yeah, I'm 25, okay?
Super old. 30, yeah.
Exactly. So this Shechaniah guy, is this,
no.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he's not part of the line. Pinchas being Eliyahu is part of a very, very important chain of events within Pinchas' life, which, number 1, demonstrate him to be angelic. Number 2, give him the traits that we see manifest in Eliyahu, particularly the trait of being zealous. It's manifest in traits as well as in the language used in Tanakh for both of them. Plus, Pinchas is superannuated, and I don't mean 30. Pinchas is found in the book of Yehoshua at the end. He is found in the book of Shoftim. And depending on how you read a verse in Divrei Hayamim, he may be around in the time of David HaMelech as Pinchas, not as Eliyahu, as Pinchas. So we have reasons to make the Pinchas-Eliyahu association. I have never seen anybody try to make the bridge now and say, and by the way, he's also Shechaniah ben Yechiel, which would be entertaining. If you do find someone, let me know, because I think that would be cool. Debbie.
Okay, I don't know if this is what you're saying. Probably not. So we don't really have a tradition of conversion at this time. Yes, we know about, Ruth.
We'll see conversions shortly.
Okay. And we get rid of everybody who was intermarried either way. And so we're talking about a doctrine of pure blood, and that is horrifying. Well, I don't know.
No, I think Debbie is correct. Not about the horrifying part necessarily, but I think Debbie's suggestion that in the absence of a doctrine of conversion, what you have is an ethnicity. If you don't believe in conversion, then you have to be born into it, right? You have to be born into it. However, what I would disagree with, Debbie, what I would disagree with strongly is the idea that any time you treasure an ethnicity, that is automatically resurrecting master race ideas, or in this case predicting master race ideas in eugenics. To my mind, it's possible to value a culture and to value a family without that meaning we are greater than everybody else and all else don't deserve to survive. I don't think the two go hand in hand.
Okay, to me it sounds scary, maybe because I was born in 1944, maybe because of my particular history.
Understood. I think any time you're living in the shadow of what the Nazis did, you have to ask that question. But I think the answer is that if that were true, right, then all the efforts that are being made to preserve the culture of the First Nations and so on are also, Aryan in nature. I'd be horrified by that suggestion.
Well, we could make the discussion much, much larger, but
yes, we could.
What I was saying is that the impact on me.
Okay, I hear you.
Because of my age, because I'm
right.
25.
Right. I hear that. No, it's a valid point. You can do the math later. So, hang on, we'll get there. We will get to conversion, really. Really we'll get to conversion. Okay, although not at this rate. But so, Rav Meidan's point, though, I think is interesting, not only because of the Moshe-Ezra parallels. I think that it's also important because of where it puts the credit. Moshe does not get credit for winning that war, so to speak. Pinchas gets credit for winning that war. This is Shechaniah ben Yechiel's action. This isn't Ezra's action. Ezra's going to follow through. But it's Shechaniah who actually makes this happen. It's very interesting. Shaya Cohen makes this point. Anybody here ever read Shaya Cohen on this? So, Shaya Cohen, I knew him when I had my shul in Rhode Island. He would daven with us occasionally. But he wrote a book, which I'm going to get back to later on, about, he's written a lot on the history of conversion and so on. His beliefs are not my beliefs. But his argument is that matrilineal descent does not even begin at this point in Jewish history. He thinks it's later in Jewish history, and he says that if you believe that it came from this point in history, it's not Ezra anyway, it's Shechaniah who's responsible for it, because he's the one who floats the idea of separating the families. Yeah, I reference him in source number 12, on a different point, which we'll get to next year. But he says if you're gonna claim that this is when matrilineal descent begins, it's not Ezra, it's Shechaniah, which I thought was a fascinating point. Anyway, in terms of what's going on here, before we can discuss the conversion and before we can discuss the matrilineal descent, what is the goal of making this covenant? So you could look at it and say it's a matter of expressing national will. You could look at it and say, you're right, we don't need a new covenant. It's already in our existing laws. But what we want is a rallying point for the nation to say, this is what we want to get behind, and so we affirm that. They write up a resolution, and it says, whereas this, and whereas that, and whereas that, this is what we affirm to be our national belief. That could be. Malbim, though, sees something very interesting here. Take a look, please, at source number 5. Malbim says that you need the covenant because Shechaniah sees a danger here. When word gets out that the new policy is that they have to divorce, so there are going to be a lot of people who are going to say no. And not only that, they will stand against them. And Ezra's powers are limited to carrying out that which the Torah prescribes. He has to threaten them with more severe penalties if they fail to do this, and you'll see that coming up. He says, and you would have power to do that if the community takes an oath saying this is our national policy. That would create the power to actually initiate new penalties for the people who don't cooperate. Then they would have the status of being a king, and they could give penalties that transcend the letter of the law. What he's talking about, I think, is going to come back later. We're not going to get to it this week, but that's going to be the idea of confiscating their property, which we're going to talk about for those who don't cooperate and don't participate in this process. So now let's ask the big two questions. Question number one, why no conversion option? And question number two, what happened to the Jewish women who married non-Jewish men? Why are you separating specifically the non-Jewish women who married Jewish men? I said that right? I hope? Okay. I don't know why I get so confused with that, but I do. So first of all, the conversion issue. So from a purely secular perspective, not working from the traditional Jewish sources, the argument is made that at this stage there's no organized conversion. That at this stage you don't have organized conversion. I brought you Arthur Wolak in an article from Jewish Bible Quarterly? Biblical Quarterly. I think it's Bible Quarterly. In number 6, JBQ. Sounds cooler anyway. And it fits on the line. Although the book of Ruth is the standard bearer for the acceptance of sincere proselytes, after all, Ruth was the ancestor of King David, organized conversion to Judaism was not yet an established practice in Ezra's time. In other words, it could be that somebody could convert in. He can't deny Ruth. And while he's busy not denying Ruth, he might also not deny the book of Esther and Rabim Me'ameharetz Mityahadim, which says that so many people were indeed Mityahadim, which sounds an awful lot like becoming Jewish to me. Cecil Roth has a piece on this. He's going to have to say, well, there were exceptions, but overall, conversion doesn't really exist in a formal way at this stage. And he's helped out, not just him. I mean, I brought you one writer, but your standard secular writer and biblical critic will say this. They're supported by the fact that the Torah doesn't give us a clear protocol for conversion. Right? There's no pasuk in the Torah. There's no verse in the Torah that says, you have verses in the Torah that say when a non-Jew wants to bring a carbon, an offering, they can bring a carbon, and this is what they bring, and this is how you do it. That we do have. We have verses that talk about non-Jews living among you in the land of Israel, and we talk about how they have the Noahide laws that we talk about, but there are certain rules for interaction with them. We don't have a verse that says, and when they want to be a Jew, they go to mikvah and they have a circumcision, and that's not there. So that supports the idea that it's not there because there was no formal process, and that's their contention. Yes, Shana.
Somewhere in Sacred Learning, isn't there a passage that talks about Lo Yavo V'Kahal? Yes. There are certain nations that we can't allow to enter into our congregation, which to me suggests that others could.
So that's a really good question. You have verses that say that certain nations may not enter the community, right? The examples of that would be Ammon and Moab, which ends up being the males, right? The Mitzri until the third generation. However, I don't believe Lo Yavo B'Kahal refers to conversion. I think it refers to marrying in. And my basis for saying that is that the same language refers to a mamzer. So there are those who think that it means conversion, right? The book of Yehudit, the book of Judith, is omitted from Tanakh. It's left in the Apocrypha. And there is a view that says the reason why it's omitted is not because it was written too late or because of any other problem with it, but the problem is because the last chapter in the book talks about Achior, the general of Ammon, converting to Judaism. And that's a problem because Ammon is not supposed to be able to become Jewish. To which I respond, Ammon can become Jewish. They just have to marry another Ammonite convert, but they're not. They are allowed to become Jewish. That's not the problem with the book. There may be other problems with the book, but that's not the problem with the book. Moshe.
Maybe something important in that respect is the word which would suggest that their wives were of a different culture and intended to stay that way.
Yes.
That's why they called it Shechaniah. And maybe this relates to, and I hope I get the word right, the syncretic practice among Jews at that time, that they lived a both Jewish and non-Jewish life, and their wives, they would be very happy with their alien wives. That's just one other thing.
Yeah.
Certainly this disturbs me yet, for obvious reasons. the term of Haredim b'mitzvot Elokeinu really, and maybe I'm way beyond left field, out of the ballpark altogether. It seems to me to be a way to create an elite concept, or possibly.
Why?
We're going to be the Haredim. It almost goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu when he has to deal with.
See, I think the problem is that you're working against the story. You see, if they were trying to create an elite class, then they would have said all the males who married foreign women are now excluded from the community. We will be the elite. But that's what it means to create an elite. We are the few. We are the elite. We are the Haredim, and everybody else is out. That's not what they did. They said we want everybody to be Haredim, and therefore we are inviting them in, and saying not only that, you don't have the choice to be out. You have to be in. This is not trying to create an elite. They're trying to impose their ideas on others, but that's not creation of an elite. It's saying we want everybody to be with us. Say what you want and like the word or don't like the word. I should note that really those in Ezra did not get the word from people today. It goes the other way. But you can't claim that they're setting up an elite. It's just the opposite. They want everybody to be like them. Like that or don't like that is a separate point. There was another hand, but there's a lot that has to come into this still. We're nowhere near done. So going back to Moshe's first point, that is the note made by classical commentators. You see, the question that Malkai asked, the question about Tzipora, bothers us less. Because Tzipora is before the Torah is given. And before the Torah is given, what conversion is necessary? No one converts before the Torah is given. The Torah being given is conversion. The Gemara in Krisis that outlines how one converts to Judaism models it on what happened at Har Sinai. So at Har Sinai, we brought a carbon. That's what's supposed to happen. It doesn't happen in a day without a temple, but that's what's supposed to happen. The ger brings a carbon. They have all done bris milah. They all go to mikvah. They declare Nasev and Ishma, where we will hear. That's exactly it. So I don't have to worry about it. There is a Ramban we're going to see, although it looks like we're going to see it in the fall. But if you wanted to jump ahead and take a look, he's source number 10. Don't do it now, everybody, but just at some point if you want to take a look at it. Ramban is actually going to throw a wrench into this idea, but generally speaking, it is accepted that there's no need for conversion at the time of Tzipora. However, the traditional view is that, of course, there was conversion. What do you mean there was no conversion? Once we have a ritual as defined at Sinai, anybody who wants to become a Jew just does what we did at Sinai. Bris milah for the males, go to mikvah, say Nasev and Ishma, for your carbon. And that's it. That's how you would become a Jew. That's not terribly new and scary for us. And there are an awful lot of challenges to the idea that conversion was somehow an invention later. Not just the fact that we have conversions here, already at Ruth and Esther, but at what point would somebody have been able to introduce it? Conversion is not the sort of thing you just wake up one day and say, well, until now we've required only marrying our own, and until now we've required that you have to be biologically Jewish. And at this point, I think we're going to change the way things work. At what point in Jewish history did somebody just foist conversion on the nation and not have it recorded anywhere? It's not the sort of thing that you can just do. That's the advantage of the literary history that we have, is you'd have to pick a moment in time. And let me go back a step. I mentioned a little bit, I didn't go into it in depth, but in chapter 7 I talked a little bit about how Ezra is credited with all kinds of innovations. So secular historians look at Ezra and say, he did a whole bunch of things that didn't exist before. And that even you'll find some suggest, contra archaeological evidence, but you'll find some suggest that the Jews were actually just this population living in Babylon, And Ezra gives them a national history, cobbling together different stories, and leads them to the land. There are all sorts of archaeological problems with that based on evidence that has been found describing what's there in the first temple, in the first Beis HaMikdash. But leaving that aside, the reason why the historians are able to make that contention is because you have a gap in terms of our literature when we're in Bavel. There's very little to work with. Daniel, Yechiel, but there's very little to work with to tell us what's happening when we're in Babylon. And when you add in the 150, 160 missing years, there's room to make that kind of an argument. If someone had said to me conversion was created then, I would have a lot harder time disagreeing with them. But if someone's going to say conversion is post-Ezra, then I don't understand what they're talking about. What do you mean conversion is post-Ezra? So who and when? In the Second Temple period? I find that much harder to sustain. The traditional approach is that conversion existed, and if you take a look at source number 7, Ibn Ezra suggests why they didn't offer conversion here, and it's along the lines of what Moshe said. Ba'atzas Hashem, your first point, not the second one. Ba'atzas Hashem, at the counsel of God, this is what they will do to divorce their wives. L'karev al kahal Hashem o laharchik, to bring close to the community of God, meaning convert them, or to distance them. V'lo matzanu she'ekrivu echad mehem, but we don't find that they actually converted any of them. There's no mention in the text of them doing that at all. V'ulai hotzium, maybe they divorced them, shalom hayu giyorot kirus hamoaviyah, because they wouldn't have been like Ruth. Ruth is great, but that's not who these were. These were the Nashim Nachriyot, from the land, from the Samaritans and so forth. You wouldn't have had people coming in who wanted to genuinely become Jewish, right? And this type of a thing follows through in the general hostility to conversion for the sake of marriage. Whether it's valid b'diavad after the fact or not is not the point. But I think this would have been the quintessential conversion for the sake of marriage. This is it. And he says, we're not doing that. Rabbi Yaakov Meidan in source number 8 makes a stronger point. He goes beyond what Ibn Ezra does and says, essentially what it sounds like he's saying is, even if there would have been a righteous one among them, it wouldn't have been wise socially to go that route. He says, Bimei Shlomo, he gives you a comparison to the time of Shlomo HaMelech, of King Solomon. You remember that Shlomo marries foreign wives. Right? He marries these political marriages, women from the various nations around them. So there is an idea that Shlomo's wives converted to Judaism. So Meidan says, I don't understand. If Shlomo can do it, why can't it happen here? It's good enough for the king. Why isn't it good enough for everybody else? So his answer is because it's a different moment in history. He says, Bimei Shlomo, in the days of Shlomo, HaChosen HaYehudi Ba'aretz Bifrat U'Ba'olam Bichlal, the strength of Judaism in the land specifically, and in the world in general, Haya Chazak U'Mutzak. They were strong at that point. V'lachein az yachol haya ha'am HaYehudi livloa el tochel. So at that point, the Jews could absorb into their midst, Gam bi'inachat gadol, even if it's with great unease, et hanashim ha'nochriyot shezarmu elav derech mitgarei shulchan malachim v'avdei shlomo. They could have absorbed the foreign wives who came into the nation, either for the table of kings, which is a term the Gemara uses for converting when times are good, or Solomon's servants, which we talked about in the beginning of the book in chapter 2, when we had the lineage of those who were descendants of Shlomo's slaves. B'doro shel Ezra, in Ezra's time, Haya ha'am ha'yehudi ba'aretz chalash mibichinat taranit. He says, the Jews of Ezra's day are weak from a Torah perspective, mibichinat tarbutit, from a cultural perspective, mibichinat kalkalit, from a financial perspective, mibichinat politit, from a political perspective. We're under siege. Hanashim hanochriyot harabot shezarmu elav, this great number of foreign women who would be streaming in, ayumaridot otolitimayon, would have brought the nation into assimilation. It's a demographic issue. And so even if there is a Ruth out there among these women, I'm not convinced that Rav Meidan thinks that they'd come in. Now, I don't know, Rav Meidan is not the last word on the topic. Some of you may remember, for those who did Daniel with me, we used his commentary to Daniel at a few different points. He's a rabbi in the Gush today. But I think his point is well taken, that it would have been very difficult socially to recommend conversion as an option, and so that may be the reason why it doesn't go there. So what we have are a group of Jewish men who are married to non-Jewish women. Shechaniah ben Yechiel steps up and says, this is what we ought to do. Whether that's because Ezra expects that his crying is going to lead to that, or whether that's something that Shechaniah just does on his own, he plays Pinchas to Ezra's Moshe, and that's where the nation is going to go with this, is the separation of the marriages. Now, what we did not get to is this issue of matrilineal descent. And the question of, why are you only separating the non-Jewish women and not the non-Jewish men? And the question of, what happens with these kids and why are the kids going with them? And what we're going to see, not this week clearly, are 4 different approaches. I'll mention what the approaches are, and then we have to come back after the summer to discuss them further. I have one more note when we're done with these 4 approaches, so don't run anywhere. The number 1, the secular approaches will say that this is evidence of Ezra implementing matrilineal descent for the first time. So he says the women who are not Jewish and their kids are not Jewish, so they're the ones who go. As opposed to, if a Jewish woman married a non-Jewish man, the children are Jewish and there's no reason to chase anyone away. That's one approach that is brought. I think it has difficulties, but that's one approach. Second approach is that Ezra actually ordered it both ways. This, based on a verse we're going to see later in this chapter, Ezra actually orders that both non-Jewish men and non-Jewish women be separated. Approach number 3 is that there were no marriages in which Jewish women married non-Jewish men. We talked about this already before. And then approach number 4, which is Shia Cohen's suggestion, and I think it's straightforward, is that Ezra had no power over those marriages. Women tended to go with the man, right? So if a Jewish woman married a non-Jewish man, she likely wasn't living among the Jews. Yeah, he's out of his jurisdiction. What's he going to do? What decree is he going to make? You, Samaritans, what do you expect him to do? And so therefore he makes his decree upon those who are within his jurisdiction, so to speak, which I think is the simplest approach to all of it, if also the most depressing. Okay, but that's in terms of that point. We'll come back to it and discuss that substantively, I hope, when we resume. I wanted to thank everybody for what has been for me a fun year. I thought in the beginning of the year that we would do Ezra and Nechemiah. I will blame the fact that we didn't complete both on the fact that we only started after Sukkot. We could have had 3 or 4 good weeks there before Sukkot, and then I'm sure we would have done it. I apologize for anyone who really wanted to do Ezra and Nechemiah this year and thought they were signing on to get both in. I really tried to, but it was beyond me. But I do hope that everyone will be able to resume next year, and I want to thank Shari Shamayim for hosting, and Joyce, and in absentia Rebecca for coordinating everything this year. Thank you.